You're listening to the Faith and Other Oddities podcast, brought to you by the Raven Creek Social Club, where we talk about faith and other oddities. For questions, comments, or to be part of the conversation, join us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, where you can find us at Raven Creek SC. Now for your hosts, Emily Dixon and Nathan Underwood.
So anyone looking forward to any kind of reports about what kind of meal Emily had will probably be disappointed, as my youngest child is ill. So we just found out after recording the last episode, my wife informed me that she's carrying a fever. So rather than make the babysitter sick, we're going to
just make me sick.
Well, we didn't know she wasn't sick. If she'd been sick before you got here, we'd have told you to stay away. But
because that's what happened last weekend, actually.
Yeah. It's a little too late now, so.
Yeah. So pray for me.
Yeah, and the rest of the family.
Yeah, kids, I forget what little germ factories they are when I'm not with them all the time, and thankfully I'm not with them all the time.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, but you love them anyway for some reason, even though
it's because they're cute,
little petri dishes.
And your child is cute.
My child is very cute, and both of them are very cute. And
well, it's like last night I told her not to stand on the cushions, and she didn't think that was kind of me to tell her not to stand on the cushions that were stacked on top of each other and wobbling.
Right.
And then I said, you've got to listen to me, especially when I'm telling you to do something your dad has already told you to do or not to do. And she goes, "You heard him?" Ah. And I mean, she's too young to talk like that.
Oh, she's sharp for her age. She's got a really interesting command of I would say language, but she doesn't have all of her. She still doesn't get some of her syllables correct, but her tone and inflections are just ridiculous. She's pretty funny. The other day, we walked into to daycare, and the teacher was. My daughter growled and said, "I'm a dinosaur," and the teacher goes, "Oh, that's great, because we're doing D is for dinosaur," and my daughter just goes, "Uh-huh." Yeah.
Tell me something I didn't know.
Of course D's for dinosaur. Who doesn't know D is for dinosaur?
Yeah, they keep you on your toes, and the two of them, oh my goodness.
Yeah, the problem is I have two very smart daughters.
What I used to tell people, I used to pray for smart kids, and then God made them smarter than me. That's just not fair.
Yeah, you've got smart kids too, and so it's its own kind of challenge. I love them to death, but man, when they get something in their head, and they're strong-willed too. That's the other part of it.
Oh yeah,
that they don't back down. But we're working on that, all with grace and love and as much patience as we can put together. So.
Yeah, but hey, I miss a meal, but I get to go out on that other glamorous outing you promised me.
Yeah, well, yeah, we might go microwave shopping later, but that's a whole nother deal. I was just thinking, speaking of raising children, at least I don't have 12.
This is true, but you also don't have 4 wives.
Well, that's well, I don't get the guys who want a whole bunch of wives. I've got one wife, and I'm busy enough as it is.
Yeah, I personally think that's a great thing that went out of vogue. Which, by the way, most people don't realize it, but by the time that Jesus was alive, the rabbis had pretty much ruled that having one wife was far more virtuous than having multiple wives. And so this was already falling out of practice in Judaism by that point. And it was based primarily on Song of Songs and on the writings of the prophets. Randomness right there for you.
Okay. So maybe we'll hit more on that later. But that's kind of interesting. But yeah, well, I don't know if I've mentioned it on the show before, but I have a friend who had a refrigerator magnet that said in biblical times, men could have as many wives as they could afford, just like today. I thought that was kind of fun.
I won't go there because there's so many ways women can exact a price. So anyway.
Yeah. So So anyway, yeah, if and I do want to put I want to let I don't want to put off any of our YouTube listeners. I'm just gonna let you know it's cold where we're recording, because this room does have a mind of its own. So I'm sitting here with my arms crossed, not because
I
I'm
didn't make you
upset.
mad.
Yeah, no one's made me mad. I'm just a little cold.
No, it really is. It's like we went to lunch and then we came back and it's like, who messed with the thermostat?
Yeah, and I'm wearing a sweater and wool socks.
Pink wool socks.
They are not pink.
They look pink to me.
Well, it's because you're nearsighted. They're actually they're white. They're white with red, and so they kind of look pink from a distance.
So they optically blend.
But not if you are closer to them. So
I'm not getting that close to your feet.
I'm not saying you have to, but I'm just saying they're red and white,
Okay, if you say so.
but not lightish red because that already has a name.
What was
Pink.
that from?
That was Red versus Blue.
Okay, I was like, that's from something. Man, random, random quotations that you never know what you're going to get here. But so we left Jacob. He just had his first encounter with God at Bethel, and we don't know what color his socks were. Probably didn't have any. But anyway, that's a whole other story.
Probably
Biblical-
didn't need any.
Well, I don't know.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I guess
Deserts get cold at night.
that's true, but he was probably under a blanket or something.
One would hope. And see, these are the sorts of details that I wonder about what was going on, but
You know,
evidently it wasn't important.
ancient footwear. I'm sure somebody has something on it.
Well, okay, speaking of ancient footwear, you know the story in Ruth with Boaz, and Boaz takes off the sandal, or
Yeah.
I've always wondered, when they do that sort of ceremony, does the guy get a sandal back? Nobody has ever been able to answer that
Do you get
question.
it back later? Does someone have a replacement sandal? Do you swap sandals? Do you run around with mismatched sandals?
Do you just give him your other sandal because you don't need one?
You don't want to walk in a circle.
So anyway, and this is the reason why we see things in the Bible that sometimes people miss, because we do go to those ridiculous places. But reining it back in, he has left Bethel. He's made his vows with God. God said he's going to bring him back safely. Jacob has either questioned God's intention or has agreed to walk in faith based on God's statement. Like we said last week, that's going to depend on how you read it, because we don't have the inflection and we don't have the same punctuation in Hebrew that we do with English. And Jacob is heading to the house of Laban.
Yeah.
He's heading east. Heading east in the Bible is always kind of a dicey proposition, because most people who head to the east don't come back.
Yeah. It's actually kind of funny because in more like European lore, the West is where people don't come back from, and that's the way of death, and that partly comes from number one, just kind of the sea being a chaos type symbol to the ancients, but then that was also reinforced, especially after the disclosure of America, that the great European disclosure of America, not the discovery, but anyway,
Government conspiracies existed back then.
But well, I'm not saying conspiratorially. I'm just saying that it was disclosed to Europe,
right,
by whoever. It could, that's a whole nother topic for another show that's not ours. But with people migrating west, they were likely to never be seen again. So oftentimes they were treated just kind of basically like they were dead. So west is more.
Well, then you've got the sun dies every night in most ancient mythologies, creation stories, especially Egyptian. And the sun sets in the west. So yeah, death and the west were very much tied together. But in the Bible, basically anytime you go away from Jerusalem, you're in trouble. You aren't leaving that area voluntarily. I mean, there are exceptions, but that's kind of an overarching principle that you want to stay in that area because that's where God is.
Right.
And that's important. So Jacob gets to Laban's house, and he shows up at a well. And as I said last week, if you want to meet your future spouse in the Bible, you just go hang out at the well, because there's always going to be somebody around there.
There's a There was a little coffee shop here in Norman called Jacob's Well, and it's a college town. I wonder if there's anything to that. That's where people.
Could be. I mean, that's.
Little hope. I don't know,
But when Jacob arrives, I think the first thing that kind of stands out is when they get there, there's a stone over the well. And Jacob evidently knows something about herding sheep, and he just kind of he's like, basically, why aren't y'all watering the sheep and getting them out to pasture?
right.
He's very much, you're burning daylight here. And he just takes over. I mean, this is a stranger who walks into a brand new situation, and he doesn't, no by your leave, no niceties, just, you people are idiots. You need to be at work.
Mhm.
And that's totally counter to Isaac. You know, we talked about how Isaac, most things happen to him. And he just kind of, oh, so this is what we're doing today. And I think what you're reading out of your Jewish study Bible, and it's like Isaac is sometimes even comical in
Yeah.
his passivity.
Yeah, and yeah, they definitely talk about that a little bit. It's really funny though, because basically when I looked at the commentary in the Jewish Study Bible, is basically what you said. There's really not much to say about him, although he's pretty ridiculous in the way he doesn't get things done.
Right. He's, but at the same time, he's the one who, he doesn't make a lot of mistakes either. So there's something to be said for that. So,
But he did make one big one.
Jacob for Esau.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although to be fair, he was fooled, but still, pretty big mistake.
Very, very manipulated there. And so, and this is the reason why Jacob's on the run and going to Laban's house, because Esau is going to be mad. And Rebecca was scared that Esau might actually kill Jacob.
Right.
And she knew that she'd already severed that relationship with Esau in being involved in the deception. And so she was doing her best to save the only son that she still had a relationship with.
Right.
But when Jacob sees Rachel approaching, he grabs her up and he kisses her. And at this point, it's still a cousinly kiss. It's, I'm just happy to see you. You're my cousin. You're part of the family. I found where I'm going. I know we don't kiss our cousins,
Nope.
but yeah. And oh well, we won't make that joke. So, but here's the question with Jacob. When he sees Rachel, because you got to remember who Jacob is. Jacob is all about getting ahead. He's about making sure that he's got a chance to do the have the most to gain out of a situation. So when he sees Rachel, what is he seeing in her? Because she walks up, she's got a flock of sheep. She's the only woman in the Bible who's identified as a shepherdess.
Right.
We have other women who might herd sheep. I mean, we've got
Moses' wife.
Mm-hmm. And we know that she was herding the sheep, but she's not specifically called a shepherdess. And this is going to be important later on in some stuff that I have got dug up for us. But think about her name.
Rachel. Okay.
Rachel means you.
Oh, does it?
It means
okay.
sheep. So
and Leah means cow.
Leah means cow.
Which is kind of funny.
And so the question here is Jacob seeing Rachel as a person, or is he seeing her as a business opportunity?
Well, I mean, if he is, he wouldn't be out of step with anyone else in the ancient world, really.
Well,
or at least most other people.
Yeah, because that's what wives represented. They were either business deals, they were peace treaties, they were trade routes. That's what women served, because the idea was if you have a woman in your enemy's camp, then you're going to do your best to keep peace with each other,
mm-hmm.
to protect her life, that she would be cared about enough either by the enemy
mm-hmm.
or by you that y'all would not violate the peace. So, and as soon as Jacob sees Rachel, evidently he was smitten with her quite quickly. And whether that was for her as a person or her as a business opportunity, he pretty much decides she's the one he wants.
Right.
And that leads to the very interesting story of Rachel and Leah. And sorry, my
what?
Yeah, I had one of those.
Yeah, So Rachel and Leah. So Laban, Jacob shows up, hangs out at Laban's place for about a month. Laban, it's kind of funny the way it's worded, at least in the ESV. He's been stayed with him for a month, and he says, because you are my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me what your wages shall be. And so basically, Laban was at least doing well enough to say, if you're going to be here and you're going to work, I can't expect you to just, because I'm guessing Jacob was probably helping out during the month that he was there. And so,
well, he set the tone for that when he walked up to that well and says, "You're burning daylight."
Yeah. And so Laban was basically saying, you're doing a good job, but if you're going to be here, I have to pay you something, or because it's wrong of me to take advantage of the fact that we're cousins.
Which is really kind of interesting when you consider that this is Laban who's saying it.
Right.
Because he's a snake oil salesman, right down the line. And so and Jacob, of course, names his price, which is Rachel.
Yeah.
And then at the last minute, Laban slips Leah into the wedding tent, and Jacob spends the night with her. So now they are married.
Right.
Because in the ancient world, it wasn't so much the ceremony that constituted marriage. It was the consummation that constituted marriage. And this is kind of Jacob, what Jacob has sown has coming back to bite him in the butt, because he tricked Isaac because Isaac couldn't see. And now when Jacob can't see in the darkness, Laban tricks him.
Right.
And this is going to set the tone for their entire relationship. The two of them, they're very similar at this point.
Right.
And we'll get into how that works. But I think what most of us miss, I think I was kind of always taught that he served 7 years, married Rachel, and I married Leah, and then had to serve another 7 years for Rachel, with kind of the implication being that 7 years later, he married Rachel.
Right.
In reality, it was just a week. And he, 1 week married Leah, the next week he marries Rachel. And I have always just thought, man, what was Leah thinking?
What a terrible insult. I mean, that 1 week later. Yeah. And now it's the, but then he does work another 7 years
after that,
after marrying Rachel.
Yeah. And I think that's where kind of that imaginative reading comes in, where trying to think of being Leah in that week, because now it's not about celebrating her marriage to Jacob. It really is about the anticipation for Jacob. I mean, he's stopped looking at her. He is now focused on Rachel. And so instead of being able to enjoy her new husband, she knows her new husband's anticipating getting the bride he wants.
Right.
And what a miserable situation. And this kind of explains some of her actions as we move forward. And this is also part of the reason why in the Torah, it's forbidden for a man to marry sisters.
Okay.
Yeah. So you could have multiple wives in the Torah, but not sisters, because there's a recognition that this caused so much pain.
Caused a lot of problems.
Exactly. And I think one of the things that we talked about in a previous episode was that word hated. And when we talked about it in the context of Jacob have I loved, Esau have I hated. It specifically says here this is Genesis 29:31, and the Lord saw, my version says unloved. What does yours say?
It says it saw that Leah was hated. It has that here in the text. And now, at the same time, it says that she's hated, but she has a whole lot of kids listed right after this. So Jacob obviously was not completely ignoring her.
Yeah.
Right?
That's a very polite way to put it. Yeah, and that's the thing. It's not that she's hated in the way we define hated.
Right.
She's just not loved as much as Rachel is loved. And it says that because
and of course I read through this earlier, and I'm sorry,
Okay.
when I read through this earlier, I was actually thinking of it as in that Leah was giving her, or that Rachel was giving Leah strife more than anything about Jacob and her relationship. So, but I can definitely see your reading as well.
Well, and there is some of that, but at the same time, you got to keep in mind that when Jacob gets ready to pull up, stakes and move, that Rachel and Leah are working together,
Right.
and so, and they have the kind of relationship later on. They're going to negotiate for Jacob's time and attention,
Okay.
and so they are able to at least work out something where both of them can kind of get what they want,
Right.
and they aren't completely giving each other the cold shoulder like women tend to do whenever we get angry. It's just forget that you're even alive. So
Yeah, it's just I don't know. It's just a weird situation to me. That everyone's like, okay, yeah, whatever.
well, I think this has something to do with the emphasis that we've placed on sex and love,
Mhm.
and sex and love being synonymous. And marriages really were utilitarian at this
Right.
point. The idea of romantic love, that's really not going to come along until what? Richard the Lionheart, and their mother is kind of considered to have been the first woman to marry for love,
Okay.
as far as historically. Now we know we've
I've
got
never
Roman.
researched that, but
It's
so
a Cahill thing. I'm surprised you didn't know that.
well, I'm sorry, I haven't read everything Cahill's done. Go ahead.
But yeah, so there's this reasoning that God has seen, and that's very specific. God saw that Leah was unloved or Leah was hated. He sees her, and we're back to that vision aspect of Jacob's story again.
Right.
And she has a son. Her oldest son's name is Reuben,
Hmm.
and his name. The text say, I'm going to try to read around the microphone. It says, the Lord has seen my affliction. And affliction there, that word typically has a sexual connotation to it, and the idea of sexual abuse. It's the word that's used in with Dinah whenever she's raped. That's Jacob's daughter, and that'll happen later.
Okay.
It's the word with in Judges, the Levite and the concubine.
Yeah.
That's the same word. Tamar and Amnon, David's daughter and son.
Right.
Also, the same word. In Exodus 1, and we've talked about that with the women being kept alive by Pharaoh.
Right.
Same word. And so this has led to the idea that God saw that Jacob was basically neglecting her, and that he was not fulfilling his duties as a husband.
It is interesting. In this, you have the reversal here. If he's like not fulfilling his duties as a husband, he's neglecting,
Mm-hmm.
and that would be. I guess the rabbis probably thought that had something to do with needing to do your duty as a husband.
Yes, every Sabbath.
Right.
And there's actually, depending on what your job description is, it's broken down that, I think it's a camel driver only has to have sex with his wife once a week. If you have a merchant, then it's like twice a week. And if you're a scholar, then it's 5 or 6 times a week. It's basically according to how much demand does the job put on your body? Are you
Right.
going to have the energy to do so? But the idea that every woman was deserved attention at least once a week in this area was part of the law. It was part of honoring the marriage.
Right.
And so I thought it was very interesting that they would care so much to even include that aspect in the governing of the people.
Right. And then of course, in Western society we have it all backwards. That oh well, the wife should be the one to make sure she's taking care of the husband. And in this one, it's this context. And when you're looking at the ancient context, the rabbinic context, is the husband should take care of the wife. So, and I think we've touched on that before.
Well, if you've got multiple wives, I can see where one might get neglected.
Yeah. Well.
So, but Leah, I mean, she's really having a hard time here. But what's interesting, the names of her children kind of reveal this progression she's going through,
Mhm.
because God has seen her. That's Reuben's name, and then after Reuben, she has Simon. God has heard her,
Mhm.
and she has she's not abused anymore. And so she's seeing where God is stepping in on her behalf, but she's still got her eyes on her husband because Levi, his name means my husband will join me. He will be attached to me. I've had him 3 sons, so now he has no reason to be attached to my sister, basically is what it boils down to. But it's kind of a hope for the marriage that she still has this chance that her marriage is what's going to bring her happiness.
Right.
And but by the end of it, her last not by the end of it, but by this cycle, the last child born is Judah, and his name means this time I will praise the Lord. And she's now moving away from her hope being in Jacob doing the right thing, and her hope's in God doing the right thing.
Is it necessarily that? I mean, like I said, I skimmed this earlier, so I didn't.
Mhm.
I didn't get a chance to read as deeply on this. I kept I've been doing a lot of technical stuff all week. So so at this point, Rachel saw that her sister's giving children, doing marriage,
Same difference.
giving children, having children. Oh my goodness. So I'm just kind of curious. So then, is at this point, is it possible that maybe there is some distance, like you said, because if he might have seen Rachel as like kind of a business opportunity, part of that in this marriage relationship at the time would be assumed that there would be children to help work the business. So is it possible that as the progression of names, is she seeing Jacob move farther from Rachel more towards her because she's giving children?
I think there's some of that aspect.
Having children.
I think there's some of that aspect in there too. But there is, if you notice, the first 3 names have they're not really about God. Even though God's mentioned, they're really about her position with Jacob.
Right.
And how she relates to him.
Mhm.
But then when this time I will praise the Lord, there's almost this, there's no mention of Jacob.
Right.
And it's not even, there's no mention of the relationship, because I missed it in my notes. Rachel hadn't had any kids at this point.
Right.
But she had given Jacob her maidservant,
Mhm.
Bilhah, to be the most translation. What's your translation say? That's verse.
This one says wife.
This one says wife?
Mhm.
Okay. Some say concubine, but the Hebrew there literally is wife. And so she had 2 sons at this point.
Who's that?
Bilhah.
I
It says she had Dan. And yes, that's the only one. And Naphtali.
Yeah.
Dan and Natali, because the Dan means to judge, and Rachel says, now God can judge between us. And then Naphtali is a contest or fateful contest. So Rachel is really seeing herself in
as competition.
As competition. And one of the interesting parts of this story is she says that Bilhah will have children on her knees.
Yeah.
Okay. Knees is a euphemism because there's no word for the external genitalia in Hebrew.
Right.
So a lot of times when you say feet or legs or thighs, in Hebrew, it's not really talking about any of those body parts.
Sure.
So one of the sayings that let me get the right in Akkadian, a man who has no knees is impotent.
Right.
And so I thought that was kind of okay, that's a fun little way to twist that. Can you hear that in the Cialis commercials?
Sure.
So but yeah, so there's this contest going on between the two of them. And Leah, it's like when she finally comes with this acceptance that this is kind of how things are going to be, and she's able to kind of put things down and rest in God, then she stops having children. Although she does have Dinah. And no, that's not here yet. Sorry. Jumping ahead here. After you read so much of this, it all starts to blend
Right.
together.
Well, especially when you read and reread it like you do.
Yeah. Well, and you have to, and then threads cross and recross, and
Right.
but
I would say this is the part of the story I'm least familiar with, so I probably haven't been to as many women's Bible studies.
yeah, and that was the other point I was going to bring up. When not women's Bible studies, that's a topic we won't go down. But anyway, when Laban married Leah off, he gave her Zilpah, a handmaid,
Mhm.
and there's a good possibility that he may have given Zilpah to Leah because Leah is considered to have weak or tender eyes, is a better translation, and we don't know what her, what her condition was. Was she nearsighted? Was she blind? Did she have severe allergies?
Right.
We really don't know. And sometimes, particularly in these cultures, if there's one kind of malformation or weakness or illness, there's this concern that a woman might not be able to actually have a child.
Right.
So there's speculation that Laban gave Leah the handmaid to kind of guarantee her place in Jacob's house.
Mhm.
So there would be able to be children. And that because he gave Leah a handmaid, then Rachel was given one just kind of like, oh, well, I did it for your sister, so I better do it for you too.
Sure.
And so there's kind of this little twist of fate here where it's actually Rachel who needs the handmaid to have her children on her behalf.
Hmm.
Yeah. And my Bible closed. Okay. I lost my place for a moment. And evidently we move forward from verse 13 to 14 like pretty quickly
Right.
because Reuben's old enough that he's out working in the harvest. And not only is he old enough to work in the harvest, evidently he's able to identify an aphrodisiac when he sees one.
Right.
So I'm not thinking he's 8 or 9 years old.
Yeah.
I'm thinking he's a little older.
Probably has a little more interest in things other than agriculture.
Don't set me up for jokes Dad would tell like that. So, but this is kind of a foreshadowing here because why in the world is this boy so interested in his mother's sex life?
I don't know. Why are you asking me that question?
Well, I'm not really asking. I mean, that's just a good question. So he finds mandrakes. Okay. So we got several things going on here. Just settle in for a little bit. So got several things going on here. Number one, mandrakes were considered to be an aphrodisiac because they're shaped, the roots are shaped like people.
Right.
And there has been all of this folklore that has grown up in all sorts of cultures about the power of this plant.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you even see it in the Harry Potter movies that they're growing and harvesting mandrakes. Now, they're stylized and they scream, but
that goes back to this time. There's this idea that they did scream.
Mhm.
If you harvest them, I believe it was the Celts or the Germans who were also Celtic that believed that in order to harvest a mandrake, you would tie a rope on a dog and then the other end to the plant, and then you would scare the dog away. And that's how you would harvest.
that way you could harvest them at a safe distance.
Exactly. Because if you heard the scream, then you would die.
Right.
And even in the Talmud, there's stories that Reuben was able to harvest these by actually tying a rope to a mule. And again, anything in the Talmud, while might be interesting, yeah, we can't count that as definitely correct.
Sure.
And the mandrakes are supposed to be able to increase fertility. They're supposed to be able to not just do that, but they're also supposed to increase, affection. They're also a love potion.
Right.
And Leah evidently has that in mind because, she says to Rachel goes to Leah and says, "Let me have your son's mandrakes." But Leah said, "Was it not enough for you to take away my husband that you would also take away my son's mandrakes?" And this whole conversation is just whacked because
Like what? Well, what's he gonna do with them?
Well, yeah, because it's like, wait a minute. Well, he brought them to his mom because Reuben already has a clue that power and importance are tied up in childbearing.
Right.
And Rachel, she says, I promise he shall lie with you, talking about Jacob, tonight in return for your son's mandrakes. Now, notice this. Starting in verse 14, Reuben came on some mandrakes. He bought them to his mother, Leah. Rachel said to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. And she said to her, was it not enough for you to take away my husband that you would take away my son's mandrakes? Rachel replied, I promise he shall lie with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes. And Jacob came home from the field that evening, and Leah went out to meet him, and Leah went out to meet him and said, you are to sleep with me, for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes. Notice the repetitive phrase.
Mandrakes?
Your son, my son, your son.
Yeah.
These are Reuben's mandrakes, and the writer's trying to draw attention to the fact that this is Reuben's mandrakes. He's trying to draw attention to the fact Reuben is meddling where he has absolutely no business meddling at all. And this is typical Reuben. As we go through this, Reuben is the typical firstborn. I can say that because I am the firstborn.
Fair enough.
And he is constantly sticking his nose in to where it doesn't belong. And it's foreshadowing because in chapter 35, Reuben sleeps with Bilhah.
Okay. Oh, yeah, that's right.
Uh-huh. And I'm going to hit that now just because I don't want to stop on it again. Since we're talking about Reuben and his weirdness, we might as well just wrap it all up.
Go for it.
Here's the whole story. I'm going to read the entire text. While Israel stayed in that land, Reuben went out and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel found out. So there's your entire...
That's the whole story, huh?
That's the whole story. Now, there's been a lot of debate about why this happened, because obviously that's not included in the text.
Right.
The writers of the Talmud and the sages tried to really make this kind of a loving act.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I see your brain working. This happens right on the heels of Rachel's death. And so Rachel was the favorite.
Mm-hmm.
Bilhah is her maidservant.
Right.
And so by doing this, Reuben basically ejects Bilhah from Jacob's house. She can no longer be a part of his family and household, and so she can't become the favorite wife.
Okay.
So he's clearing the path to make sure that Leah is able to step into that favorite wife place instead of one of the handmaids.
And especially not the handmaid of the favored wife.
Precisely. Now, that is the most generous reading. And as we've talked about before, there's always an alternative.
Sure.
And the other thing is, this could be a political move on Reuben's part.
Trying to usurp power.
Trying to do that. And he's doing it in two ways. Because in ancient cultures, the idea that if a man can sleep with another man's wife, then he's basically saying, I can replace you in every other aspect too.
Right.
If I can replace you in bed, and this is why it's such a big deal that Absalom sleeps with David's concubines. This is, it's basically a challenge.
Sure.
And the other thing he's doing is, at this point in time, it was still customary that when a man died, the sons inherited all the wives and the concubines. And so it's claiming his inheritance before the proper time.
Which we all know, well, a lot of us do know about that. It's kind of shows up later in the prodigal son story, wanting inheritance before someone passes, saying, I wish you were dead. That's basically what it's saying.
Yeah, and I think Reuben's got some animosity towards his dad because he is very much involved in this rivalry, but for his dad's attention.
Right.
And of course, and this also plays out in Joseph's scenario, which we'll be going into.
Mm-hmm.
But it's Reuben just he's always just making these horrible decisions. And this is one of the reasons why it's so important in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy forbids this.
Right.
And it says that, no longer can a son sleep with his father's wife.
Right.
Not just his mother. This is including the concubines and any other wives that are around. And it's to prevent this sort of thing from happening. So this is the reason why that question, why is Reuben so involved in his mom's sex life, is important.
Well, and it's one of those, and the thing is, it's one of those things I don't think you should have to tell someone. But, there's just some things that you find out people will do, and you're like, you find out certain rules about stuff, and you're like, there's a reason that rule is here.
It's the Husqvarna chainsaw.
Yeah, somebody decided to make a bad decision. What's the Husk?
Oh, when I sold hardware.
Do not stop blade with hand?
Or crotch. Literally, that was what was on the tag. And so somebody had to have done that in order for there to be a rule to tell people, don't do that. We had, matter of fact, in the warehouse when we worked together at Sears, there was a sign, do not jump in dumpster when running or something like that.
Do not jump, yeah.
Because somebody
do
did.
Not jump in the trash compactor while it's running. Yeah, that was, yep. The stuff people have to be told just baffles me, but that's a whole nother topic for another day.
But we got to think about in this era where we're talking specifically within the Bible,
mm-hmm.
Civilization is just being birthed.
Right.
It's really, we're just starting to get those rules of common decency and conduct and how do you treat fellow human beings.
Right. Yeah, I guess, yeah, there's plenty of things that people have had to be told that should be given. Don't kill other people for one. But yeah, there's plenty out there.
And this whole scenario, if you take the time to read through it and the back and forths and who's Jacob sleeping with each night, Leah and Rachel basically writing out a schedule and hiring him out. We call this prostitution today. It is a story of manipulation, and it's manipulation after manipulation. And it's really funny because it's Jacob being manipulated.
Right.
And Jacob, during this time in Laban's house, he is passive. He's extremely passive. He doesn't name any of his kids. Not one of them. And for a father not to name any one of his 12 sons, that's odd.
That is very odd.
So, excuse me.
Now, yeah, and you say he was very passive during this time, but it's also, he's kind of already still signed the contract, so to speak. He said, hey, 7 years of labor, that's what it's going to take. And he's, so I would imagine he's probably just keeping his head down, powering through, till retirement.
Kind of like our dad did.
Yeah, just head down, power through and get it done. And then after this time, then just save, work up,
Well, there's some of that.
Collect your goats. Get ready to leave.
Just the spotted ones. But there's some of that. But also to remember Dinah, when Dinah's raped, it's not Jacob who says, this was a horrible thing done to my daughter. It's Reuben and Simon who step up because Reuben's in the middle of everything.
Right.
And set off an entire war with Shechem. And so there's this element that where the Bible over and over again shows that fathers who are being passive towards their children are asking for trouble.
Right.
And Jacob's going to definitely reap what he sowed there. And so I'm looking. And I was just looking what I had. Dina's actually, I've got her highlighted here because she's the only girl that's named.
Right.
And we don't know if she's the only girl born.
Or the only one that's given a name, which is common in, this era in the text, to not name any of the women.
Well, and I think maybe one of the reasons why she is named is because she is at the center of the war at Shechem.
Sure.
And so she's going to play a huge part. And so the Bible just kind of drops her name in. And that way, whenever you hear it later, you know who she belongs to and why it's important.
Right.
And each of the child's names, even though the mothers named them in an attempt to kind of, to describe their relationship to Jacob and where they feel like their position is in the family, they actually wind up having a dual meaning, and that becomes very obvious whenever we go through Jacob's blessings for his sons.
Right.
And Reuben, excuse me, Reuben is actually discounted, even though he's the oldest and would by all rights have the largest inheritance and be the one who steps up into a leadership position.
Mhm.
Because of what he did with Bilhah, he's removed from that position.
Right.
And actually Joseph is placed into that position and in Jacob's blessing.
Right. And because Joseph was the favorite son in
Mhm.
general.
Yeah.
And if no one's picked up on this yet, because wasn't Joseph the youngest?
Benjamin was.
Benjamin. Okay.
Mhm.
So he was, but I know Joseph was pretty far down the list, wasn't he?
Yeah. Yeah. He's like next to the last.
Yeah. So there's this reversal theme going on, that the son of the second wife, the almost youngest son. Then you also have Jacob himself being the younger son. Everything's backwards. And you see that continue on to David.
Mhm.
And you see that, going on to Jesus' teachings. The first shall be last and the last shall be first. And so you kind of, that pattern just keeps recurring of just things that were not what you expect. And so, sorry.
No, that gave me time to look at my notes because I'm actually going to skip over a section and I'll save it for next time.
Okay.
And it's not a section in the Bible, so we're good. But because I just don't want to get too far afield with the time we have left. And so Jacob has Laban's two daughters. He's got Laban's grandsons,
Mhm.
and he's working for Laban. And after Joseph is born, Jacob says, "Okay, I've been here long enough. I've fulfilled my duties and obligations to your father. I think it's time we should leave."
Right.
And so he talks with Leah and Rachel, and he's like, Let's go." And actually, he goes to Laban first, and Laban is
Why
we're
don't you stay? Things are going so well.
which is exactly the same language that Abimelech uses with Abraham.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And Abimelech and Laban, their vocabulary is the same.
Hmm.
They have the same worldview. We're good people. We're righteous folks. We're good to you. You be good to us. We deserve your goodness because we have been so. Forget the fact that we had a little mix up with the daughters.
Right.
We can overlook that. And
7 years have gone past. I'd imagine, you might have at least some kind of either reconciliation or not. I don't know. But
14 years had passed by this point.
well, no, 7 years since the
Oh yeah.
mix up.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. 7 years since the mix up. And he tells Jacob, "Tell me what you want. What am I going to pay you?" And Jacob is starting to get a clue.
Mm-hmm.
And he knows that.
Don't ask for another daughter.
Right. You don't know what you're going to get at this point. You could get a goat. And so
Well, you got one named you and Cow. So
I was hoping my Hebrew was good enough to come up with a word for goat right off the top of my head. But anyway, and so Jacob comes up with this idea, and he says, "You know what? Don't pay me anything. I'm going to take care of your sheep, and as long as I'm taking care of your sheep, any of them that have speckled, streaked, or spotted offspring, I'll keep those.
Right.
Okay, so here's the clue, because you're talking about how well Laban was doing to be able to pay Jacob.
Right.
This is a clue, because evidently Laban was raising some high dollar sheep
Sure.
because they were solid.
Yeah.
And so Jacob says he'll do this, and Laban's kind of like, something's off here.
Yeah.
But
and if they're solid colors, high dollar sheep, and then Jacob's just basically kind of appealing to the ego on this to be like, what
we'll take the cult.
I'll take you'll have a great looking sheep, or goats. Was it goats?
Both. At this point, there's really not a huge distinction. They were
Okay.
still running together, so the words can encompass both.
Okay.
So
Like linguistically, not
yeah.
So okay, cool.
And so Jacob comes up with this plot and this plan, and this has been I remember the story used to intrigue me as a kid, because Jacob takes these sticks and he peels them. I'll just read what it says. Jacob got the fresh shoots of poplar and of almond and plane, and peeled white strips into them, laying bare the white of the shoots. The rods that he peeled he set up in front of the goats and the troughs and the water receptacles that the goats came to drink from. Their mating occurred when they came to drink, and since the goats mated by the rods, the goats brought forth streaked, speckled, and spotted young.
So weird.
Okay, well, number one.
It's a recipe for spotted goats.
Well, yeah. Where did Jacob study genetics? This is this has caused a lot of problems, because this is not the correct way. It's technically not wrong, but it's not.
It's not even wrong. It's so far off of.
Yeah, but it's still sneaky and underhanded and very manipulative, which is what this whole account is about. It's very manipulative. And so there's this question of how should we view this? And not just the moral and ethical side of things. How do we view the fact that Jacob is using something known as sympathetic magic? Because
yeah, I mean, that is a good question. Now the other question is, did he set something up and then did he sneak in? Because did he sneak in some spotted goats into the breed stock? Is it possible he purchased some from a traveler, or and he's and this is the story that's handed down when his story that he told Laban,
Well, actually, what's interesting, the Bible answers kind of some of your questions, because he moved his flocks 3 days away from Laban.
Okay.
So he had his stuff separate. As soon as they hit the ground, he took them to his, or when they were ready to be weaned.
Right.
He took them to his own
sheep.
The weaning sheep.
I said the waning sheep. Sorry.
Waning, yeah.
Go ahead. When they were ready to be weaned,
So he actually removed his flock from Laban's, and he made sure, it says in 30:41 that he even made sure that when the sturdier animals, the more healthy and robust ones, were mating, that's when he would put the rods out. When the weaker, lesser quality animals were mating, he took the rods away. So there was evidently this worked to some degree. And the question of, is this right? That's been the question that has bothered so many people.
Now, did the male goat or female goat have to look? Did it have to be both?
It doesn't get that specific.
Is he over here going, hey, look over here?
Yeah.
Kind of occupied. What? Sorry.
Well, there's, how does this work? Like I said, this was sympathetic magic. Anybody who's read The Golden Bough by James Frazier.
Because who hasn't?
You haven't?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Well, he breaks down sympathetic magic into two categories. There is like produces like, or the law of similarity.
Okay.
The second is the law of contagion, that basically you can come in contact with something, and even whenever it's moved away, then the magic that it possessed would be sufficient to cause an effect. Uh, Probably the most famous example of sympathetic magic in the Bible is the bronze serpent,
Right.
and that's in what numbers? I've got the Jesus talking about it in John.
Yeah, I don't remember which verse, but everyone's been bitten by snakes.
So you look at it.
Snakes all around, and then so then Moses is to fashion a bronze snake and hold it up, and anyone who looks at it is cured from their snake bite.
Exactly. And so and then Jesus actually refers back to this in John 3 and says, just as the serpent was lifted up in the desert, so must the Son of Man be lifted up.
Right.
And so it's like curing like, or like producing like. And actually, this is the basis for The Secret. It is this like producing like, that if you think positive things and good things will come to you. And,
Yeah.
And so
I had a manager who was really into that, and I thought that was really interesting because other than, like, he hardly ever talked about any kind of spiritual stuff, but he was talking about The Secret, and he's like, it's magnetism, basically. He goes, magnetism is the strongest force in the universe. So I'm thinking, actually, it's I believe it's ionic bonds. But I can't remember. It's one of the subatomic bonds. But gravity is the farthest reaching. It was gravity is what he said, not magnetism. Gravity is. I'm like, well, gravity is the farthest reaching that we know of. But that's a whole nother technical. I love it. Yeah, sorry, that's a whole nother thing.
Well, and I think most Christians who, if you've been listening to good teaching, they've probably told you that The Secret is akin to witchcraft and that you shouldn't do it, and that there's a prohibition against, because it is very new agey. I've read the book, I've watched the video, and it's a lot of new age thought in there, and Deuteronomy, and we do have prohibitions against magic. We have prohibitions against any kind of witchcraft. And so the fact that Jacob is engaging in this is causing problems for a lot of commentators, even Jewish commentators.
Mhm.
Now, we know later on Jacob will, he's going to tell his wife that he had a dream and that God told him to do this.
Right.
But there's a question there, because did God really tell him to do it?
Right.
Or is he just trying to justify to his wives about why he's getting ready to one up their dad?
Or is Jacob actually what we've known him to be? A liar.
Yeah, a
Or a
liar and
cheater.
a trickster. Yeah.
Because there is an interpretation of his name that is cheater, and also liar in some. I've seen some places where it's defined as liar, but that's there's a reason you earn that name.
He's a morally ambiguous person at best.
Well, and what are we learning here necessarily? Again, are we talking about righteousness and salvation? Again, you don't earn that through works, but God did make a promise, and is this an example of God fulfilling and maintaining a promise in spite of the fact that he is a shady trickster who practices, effectively occult practices?
Oh, and that's precisely what it is. And that's what has made this story so controversial. And the fact that he never cites God as the source when he first does it.
Right. Well, and it goes back to, we deify, we tend to deify our characters. And if we're looking, it's so funny because, well, look at what this person did. No. Look what God did in spite of them. And it's that redemptive quality. It's the God keeping his promise. And when we get our focus, we start reading the book and assume that the book and the story, we assume the story's about Jacob.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not.
No, it isn't. And I think that is the key, because God had promised to do all these great things for Jacob. And just like everybody else in the story has been manipulating. Laban, the wives, the only people who aren't manipulating are Bilhah and Zilpah. Zilpah, thank you. Those are the only two who are not busy trying to manipulate. Even his sons are busy manipulating.
Right.
And so here's Jacob, who like you said, he's being Jacob. And the good news about this is if you have a past, if you fail to act morally and justly and ethically, God is still willing to honor the promises he's made in the Bible to you.
Right.
And I think that's something that we need to cling on to. So I I love Jacob's story because it's not nice and pretty and clean cut.
Right. And then like I said, and then if we read it, then we can also take that and apply it to our own lives,
Hmm.
where we mess up and go, well, it's not about me anyway. And that theme again also is everywhere in the Bible as well. We see Samuel talking to God about Israel wanting a king, and God
Hmm.
says, well, they haven't rejected you, they're rejecting me. Like this, the book is called Samuel, but it's but it's not about you. And so, that's a great recurring theme that happens over and over. And again, and that trickles down even to our views on salvation and what that means. We think, salvation is all about not going to hell. That's a fantastic bonus. But to be a follower is, again, it's about advancing the kingdom. It's about being a part of God's story. It's not about God fixing our story.
Well, Jacob's a great example of why the old axiom, God helps those who helps themselves, is not true. And that it is about reliance on God. Because, yeah, Jacob went back with all this wealth that he acquired, but he went back in fear and trembling and
And was ready to just hand it all over to Esau.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's God had to move on his behalf, and God actually changes him between leaving Laban's house and getting to Esau, but that's a whole other. We don't have time to go in that.
And that's going to be really cool when we get to that. That's the part of the story I'm a little more familiar with than this one, because I've gone over it
Mhm.
more, and there's also this part is one of those. This is one of those super, and this is actually where you and I kind of differ. I'm pretty good at seeing these bigger themes, and you're right in the details and the linguistics, and so that's why this story to me, it's like you have to be in those details to really
Yeah, I don't
have it
think
pop
it's.
out.
Yeah, I don't think it's not an interesting story to me without those details, because otherwise it really kind of reads like a soap opera.
Yeah, yeah. And then a man who has goats stare at things instead of men who stare at
You guys
goats.
get ready to say. Now I'm
We'll put
picturing
that in the show notes.
George Clooney as Jacob.
Was John Malkovich in that?
I don't
I
remember.
have to look. That movie was so funny. Anyway, that's a whole nother topic for another day. So I think that's a good place to end.
Yeah.
You know,
We'll leave
so-
you there laughing at goats.
yeah, Men Who Stare at Goats. Funny movie. So yeah. Well, I'm sorry to make you carry so much of the weight on that one, but I was just, the story's not interesting. It's just not, unless you grab the details out like you do. And then I'm interested in learning, but I
really
didn't have a whole lot to contribute to this
I
one.
thought we were going to sail kind of right past it, and then I got into it. And we aren't actually done with the story. This is just a good place to put a semicolon until next week.
Yeah, just put a pin in it. So, so everyone out there in internet land, thank you for joining us, and we hope you come back next week. If you like what you heard, subscribe, share, whatever else you can do, or whatever else you feel like doing. Be part of the conversation. Let us know if you have more questions.
If we pick up a topic and don't take it far enough, let us know.
Yeah, let us know on that. But yeah, and you can do that by reaching out to us at ravencreeksc.com, which can get you to our Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, which you can also go there just directly by Raven Creek SC, adding that to the end of your Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. Come see us if you really, really like what you heard and would like to see more episodes. Head over to patreon.com/RavenCreekSC, and we will have some bonus material up there very soon. And we want to say thank you to our Patreon donors.
Mhm.
Very much appreciated. Currently, we have 2. So we love it. Katrina and Naomi, thank you very much. And we're glad you're on board with this. And anyway, everyone else, thank you for being here. We would love to have you on Patreon, but if not, share. Just help us get the word out. Other than that, I think we're wrapped up for the week, right?
Well, for today. We got 3 more episodes this week.
Well, I mean, for their week.
For y'all week. Yeah, y'ar week. Yeah.
Yar?
Yeah. I'm
Yar.
a pirate.
I'm a
Okay.
pirate. Okay. So anyway,
Bye.
everyone have a great week. Bye.
You've been listening to the Faith and Other Oddities podcast, a Raven Creek Social Club production. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you like what you've heard, please write us a review on iTunes or consider supporting us on patreon.com/RavenCreekSC. As always, thank you for listening and don't forget to join us next week.